Does the Epistle to the Hebrews teach supersessionism? Does the author suggest that the Messiah's priesthood and sacrifice have replaced the Levitical priesthood and animal sacrifices? Traditionally, many have argued yes, citing passages that mention a change in the law and that describe the first covenant as becoming obsolete. However, a growing number of scholars are challenging the supersessionist readings of those passages. My guest today, Daniel Lancaster, has recently authored a commentary arguing for a post-supersessionist understanding of Hebrews. I'm excited to have him with us to explore this perspective on the Epistle to Hebrews. Let's dive in. Daniel Lancaster, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing today, sir?
Baruch Hashem, that means thank God. I'm doing pretty good. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks. It's nice to be able to meet you. I've seen you around on social media now and then. You always have something great to say. So it's nice to make the connection and, have the conversation. Looking forward to it.
Amen. Well, yeah, thank you for that. And I just really appreciate you coming on and talking with us today. Your commentary on Hebrews is excellent. I'm anxiously waiting for volume 2 to be released, but I just think it's a really fantastic resource. And so thank you for putting that together. Before we get into that topic, I'd like to have you introduce yourself, if you don't mind, maybe talk a little bit about what you do, your background, and maybe also how you got involved in Messianic Judaism.
That's a long story. I mean, could be like a whole nother podcast. Okay, so I'm not Jewish to start with. I'm not Jewish. I'm not a PhD. I'm not a doctor. Let's say I could just keep rattling off the stuff I'm not. But I was raised a son of an evangelical pastor, and I married a girl who has some Jewish ancestry. She was Catholic, but she got me involved in interested in Chabad Lubavitch, and Messianic Judaism then sort of became like our home. We found a home in Messianic Judaism, and that was way back in like 1994 or something like that, 1993, 1994. I can't quite remember. So that's how we got started on this path, and we raised our family in Messianic Judaism. And so I went to, I started teaching at this Messianic synagogue, and I had, because I was raised evangelical, I had pretty broad biblical literacy raised as a pastor's son. And so that was an asset. But man, when I hit Jewish text, especially when I hit Jewish text studying with Chabad Lubavitch, it was just, wow, that was just like, I felt like, I felt like those disciples on the road to Emmaus when weren't our hearts burning within us as he spoke. And so I was just, because it really brought me back to faith, to be honest. I had drifted, away from the faith and, was not living a godly life. And this is what really brought me around, was to realize there is a reality here. This is solid. This is not just a fairy tale. This is substantive. So it kind of saved my life, the Messianic Jewish perspective. At least it saved my faith. And so I started teaching in a Messianic synagogue, and I started writing. I also ended up teaching at a large evangelical church called Church of the Open Door in the Twin Cities area here, and one of my students submitted some of my work to First Fruits of Zion, and they asked for permission to publish, and that just started a relationship. And so I've been working ever since then for the Messianic publisher and ministry, First Fruits of Zion, which is, our job is to really bring Messianic Jewish teaching to Christians and Jews. That's, in a nutshell, that's the main thing that we're all about. We're about catching that prophetic vision of the coming Messianic kingdom and proclaiming the Jewishness of Jesus, the Jewishness of Yeshua, and the Jewishness of his gospel message, and understanding that from a Jewish perspective. So we're deep into post-supersessionist interpretation of the New Testament. And, honestly, we've been championing that and leading the way on that on a popular level. And not on an academic level, but on a popular level. We've been spearheading that for, it's like 20 years, 30 years, something like that. So, way back in the day, we started with like books like Torah Rediscovered and such. So a lot of people that now identify themselves as part of the movement, whatever the movement is, they have some sort of connection to First Fruits of Zion and some sort of opinion about First Fruits of Zion. So that's me. I'm the education director with First Fruits of Zion. I write the Torah clubs that you can study the weekly Torah portions with us, or also the Gospels, also the Epistles. The international Bible studies, community Bible studies, that sort of thing that's is available through Torah Club. That's who I am. That's what I do. Oh, and I also teach at a Messianic Jewish synagogue. I should mention Beth Emanuel Messianic Synagogue here in Hudson, Wisconsin. Beautiful, historic Hudson, Wisconsin. How's that?
Awesome. Yeah, that was perfect. Yeah, you nailed it.
Okay, all right.
So thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate the work that you guys do at First Fruits of Zion. I've cited some of your work and my own work, and you guys really do a great job. So I appreciate all that you guys do. And so you mentioned earlier that your perspective aligns with what you call post-supersessionist.
Yeah.
And this is really a growing trend that I see in recent scholarship. As you said, you're kind of spearheading this perspective on the more general, popular level.
Right.
But in scholarship, there is a recent trend toward approaching the New Testament from a post-supersessionist perspective. And of course, that is the approach that you take in your recent commentary on the Epistle to the Hebrews,
right,
as we'll discuss a little bit later. So I wonder if you can kind of set the stage for us a little bit. What exactly is supersessionism?
Yeah. Okay.
And why is that a problematic approach? And then maybe after that, I'll have you explain post-supersessionism.
Okay.
So to start off with, what is supersessionism?
Okay. Yeah, it's supersessionism. It's that's a 50-cent word, as they say. And I always think of Mary Poppins. Like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Supersessionism is just a fancy way of saying replacement theology. Okay, so and it comes from the word supersede, the idea that Christianity has superseded Judaism and that Christians have superseded Jews as the Jewish people. The New Testament has superseded the Old Testament. Grace has superseded the law. You kind of get the idea. And you could say replacement. All these things have been replaced. All the institutions of the Old Testament, including the nation of Israel, the priesthood, the temple, all of that has been replaced by a new religion. Okay, and that new religion is, of course, Christianity. It's the church, right? So the church replaces Israel because the church has superseded Israel. That is what supersessionism is. It's just a fancy way of saying replacement theology, really.
Okay, and so obviously this approach is problematic. To how we read the New Testament. Why is that problematic? That lens with which we approach the New Testament.
Well, obviously it's going to be problematic for Jewish people. So it's going to be problematic for Messianic Jewish people. But it's also, it should be problematic for everybody. As an evangelical Christian who had never heard of a Messianic Judaism or a supersessionism or even heard the term replacement theology, it was problematic for me growing up in the church. There was just like, I did not understand. And I think a lot of people hit this too. I mean, they don't have the words for it. They don't have the language for it, but they're saying, wait a second, why don't we keep the Sabbath on the seventh day? Like it says here in the Bible, things like this, things that are just so glaring. There's like this sense of disconnection between the New Testament and in the Old Testament, the sense of disconnection between the church and Israel. That is jarring just to the Bible reader. And you're just reading the scriptures, it doesn't make sense. Okay, so it should be a problem for everybody, not just for us, but it's especially a problem for us. And I guess historically, academically, if you're looking at it that way, it's a problem because it's anachronistic.
Yeah.
And, anachronistic means something that's out of sequence in time. So there's no way that the Jewish authors of the New Testament, all the writers of the New Testament were Jewish. There's no way that the Jewish authors of the New Testament, who we see still within Judaism, through the New Testament, practicing Judaism, there's no way that they were talking replacement theology and supersessionism. Yeshua himself, Jesus himself, says, I didn't come to cancel the Torah. I didn't come to do away with the Torah. Don't even think that. So what's the first thing we do? We start thinking that. So that's the problem. That's the problem with supersessionism.
Yeah, I think you're right. Is that what you said earlier about it being anachronistic is that it's just historically implausible.
Exactly.
To read the New Testament as them just leaving everything behind and starting something new. The first Christians were Jews. They were part of Judaism. They were called the sect of the Nazarenes, as Luke calls them, and the same word that is used of the Pharisees and Sadducees in Luke. So the first Christians were within Judaism, as many scholars like to say, reading the New Testament within Judaism.
Right.
And so, it's really anachronistic to approach the New Testament from those assumptions that everything in the old has been replaced. So now that so a lot of scholars are recognizing this. A lot of scholars are recognizing that approach to the New Testament really is anachronistic. It's historically implausible. And so they're reevaluating their assumptions and presuppositions, and they're looking at the New Testament with fresh eyes within the world of Second Temple Judaism. And this has kind of developed into something that is being called post-supersessionism. Right. So could you maybe speak a little bit about that? You defined what supersessionism is. So what is this post-supersessionist approach?
Okay. I think the term probably started with Rabbi Mark Kinzer's terminology that he came up with of speaking of a post-missionary Messianic Judaism. So he authored a book by that name, Post-Missionary Messianic Judaism. And his premise was that, Messianic Jews should not be Jewish and doing Jewish things and practicing the Torah and so forth just for the sake of being missionaries. They should be practicing the Torah, and they should be living Jewish lives for the sake of being Jewish. And this was such a radical perspective in the face of supersessionism, which said, oh, no, Judaism is done away with. This was and so from that, from supersessionists would say, the only reason a Jew should practice Judaism is to trick other Jews into becoming Christians. So that's Mark Kinzer, Rabbi Kinzer was saying, no. They should be practicing Judaism. We should be practicing Judaism as Jews because we are Jewish. And this is our covenant responsibility. It's right here in the Torah. And so this was called the post-missionary perspective on Messianic Judaism. Likewise, that perspective also invites us to look at the New Testament text with a similar set of criteria. And so we refer to it as post-supersessionist, saying, okay, wait a second. If supersessionism is wrong, if replacement theology is wrong, then what did the New Testament mean? How are we to understand Paul's epistle to the Galatians or Paul's epistle to the Romans, which seems like it's kind of talking against the Torah and against Judaism, And so this school of thought, of new academic work, looking into the text, which you've got like some names, we don't need to go over the history of New Testament scholarship, but that's what. So this perspective of reevaluating the text from this perspective is called post-supersessionist. And I guess like at First Fruits of Zion, we kick around the term, what about a pre-supersessionist perspective? because a pre-supersessionist perspective would be something pre-Ignatian. You got to go back to the 1st century, early 2nd century, and start looking at some of the writing and some of the texts that are floating around in these New Testament texts, but also like things that are outside of the New Testament, like the first epistle to Clement, the Didache, and so forth, that are pre-supersessionist. They're Christian writings that haven't gotten the memo yet
Right.
that Christianity has replaced Judaism, that Gentile Christians have replaced Jewish people. We try to occupy that pre-supersessionist perspective at First Fruits of Zion.
I like that. Yeah, you're going back before some of these supersessionist ideas started popping up in the 2nd century.
Yeah.
Pre-supersession. Yeah, I kind of like that. Maybe I'll start using that too. Okay, so speaking of this perspective, this anti-supersessionist perspective, we could say, in your commentary, I really like that you rely upon the work of scholars like David Moffat and Matthew Thiessen. I'm a huge fan of both these scholars, and they really advocate a post-supersessionist reading of Hebrews. And I just want to say that you really have a gift of helping a general audience grasp some of these complex ideas that are being discussed in academia and in scholarship. But I want to ask, before we kind of get into the commentary, how exactly did this commentary come about, and what are your goals with it?
The commentary came about through a very long process of learning the book of Hebrews. When I first started as the main teacher at Beth Emmanuel, a teacher at Beth Emmanuel Messianic Synagogue, way back. It's been 22 years ago or something like that for us now. I had several people ask me to teach on Hebrews because I think they got what I was laying down about the Torah and about the Jewishness of the New Testament and that sort of thing. And they even weren't they weren't they were wrestling through Paul, but Hebrews was like the thing that people were tripping over and saying, man, it really seems like it's saying here that this is all canceled, this is all done away with. And the Old Testament's done away with here. So I thought, what, let's just teach through the Epistle of Hebrews. So that was, this is 20 years ago. I taught through the Epistle of Hebrews, and I was just astonished that every comment, I did not find there was no Matthew Thiessen or David Moffat writing back then. There was nothing. It was a wasteland. There was no commentary that supported my reading of the epistle to say that, no, I think these people, I think this is within Judaism. I don't think this is breaking with Judaism. There was nobody saying that. So then 10 years later, I was looking at it and saying, we really should take this more. I should come at this with some more rigor. And so I taught through it again. It's in the whole new batch of people. Messianic congregations have a pretty rapid turnover rate. But so I taught through it again. And that's when I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to publish this. And because a lot of people were asking, there was First Fruits of Zion had already published little portions of it here and there. And what about the sacrifices? What about the new covenant? But it just took me a long time to get around to it. So that's now I'm finally getting it out on paper.
Well, that's awesome. And yeah, I appreciate you doing that because as I said earlier, it's a really great resource. And that's fascinating that you were coming up with these ideas that we now see, a growing trend of scholarship embracing just within the past few years. A number of really good scholarly papers and books have been written on Hebrews from a post-supersessionist perspective. We mentioned David Moffat and Matthew Thiessen's paper that he wrote.
Yep.
And so it really seems like this perspective that you outline is being validated and embraced by scholarship.
Well, at least by two guys. So I hope more people, my goal, you asked, what's my goal with it? My goal would be to rescue the book of Hebrews, to rescue the book of Hebrews and say, what the Epistle of Hebrews is valid. It fits with the rest of the canon of the New Testament. It's not off doing its own thing, and it's not declaring a revolution against the Torah and against the establishment of Judaism. So.
All right. Well, that leads into my next question, which is, what is the book of Hebrews all about? Because we've often heard it said that the epistle to Hebrews was written to Jewish Christians to warn them against reverting back to Judaism. Don't go back to Judaism. We have something new here. Obviously, we don't think that's what's actually going on here. So just a broad question, but what would you say is the purpose of the epistle to the Hebrews? Why was it written in the first place?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. Actually, it's a broad question, but it's a very good question. And if you get the answer to that question right, you should be able to read the whole epistle without too much difficulty. So yeah, that is the wrong assumption to come into it saying, well, these are all Christian Jews. We're writing to Christian Jews who are in danger of backsliding into Judaism. That's an anachronism. There's no Christianity here. I set the book very early. I set the book in the 60s of the first century, based on any reference to there's no reference to the destruction of the temple, which would be a pretty low hanging fruit considering the topic of the epistle. So I put the epistle before the destruction of the temple. The writer of the epistle refers to the priesthood as still active, offering sacrifices day after day, year after year. So it seems to me like that's how you've got to reckon with that's how early it is. And as such, that puts us about a century before the emergence of Christianity as a distinct religion from Judaism. So it would be an anachronism to say they're in danger of backsliding into Judaism. They are in Judaism. We're writing to Jewish people. So my premise, and this is a little unconventional, you can read about it in the book. I actually got this idea from my dad. My dad was the one who suggested this to me. My premise is that we're writing to Jewish believers, Greek-speaking Jewish believers, like the Greek-speaking community of Stephen and the 7 deacons in Acts chapter 7. We're writing to Jewish believers, perhaps in Jerusalem, likely in Jerusalem and Judea, but if not, at least with some access and reference to the Levitical priesthood, whether through pilgrimage or through locality, who make the temple, consider the temple to be the holy house of God, the locus of their religion, just like it for the rest of Judaism in that day. It's like this is where God said he'd put his name forever. His presence is here forever. Where did you think I would be? Yeshua said, I had to be in my Father's house, about my Father's business. They were continually in the temple, worshiping God day after day, it says in the text. Okay. So the issue then becomes, you look at the history of how things went down. You see this in the book of Acts. You see this in Josephus. The early believers had sharp conflict with the Sadducean priesthood that was holding power over the temple. It was a corrupt Sadducean priesthood, because the Sadducees, they were, they had all this corruption, but they also had theological problems. The Sadducees were the anti-resurrection people. Their main thing was like, there is no resurrection. There is no afterlife. Everything is this world. Olam hazeh, this world. And so there's this sharp conflict between them, but they held the power. And so my suggestion is that the Jewish believers are being threatened with excision, excommunication from the Levitical rites that they're accustomed to. And they're being told, you have to renounce this Yeshua nonsense about this resurrected Messiah of yours, or you guys aren't welcome here. And so that's the pressure. It's not they're not being pressured to backslide into Judaism. They're being pressured to renounce Yeshua. And so the message of the book of Hebrews from end to end is, don't make that mistake. Right. That would be a terrible trade-off. If you're going to trade the heavenly high priest for a priest here on earth, for what a priest here on earth can accomplish for you versus what the heavenly high priest can accomplish for you, that's a terrible trade. Don't let go of him. Don't shirk. Don't shrink away. Be bold and steadfast, and maintain your loyalty to Yeshua of Nazareth, and you won't be disappointed for the world to come, for the reward of the world to come. And he says, because it's the world to come that we're talking about. And that is the message of the book of Hebrews.
Amen. Thank you so much for that summary. And guys, I highly recommend getting the commentary. Volume 1 is out right now. There's a second volume coming a little later. Do you know when that will be published, by the way?
Well, I'm just finishing up. On Hebrews 11. I don't have far to go. By the end of the year, I should be able to turn in a final manuscript, and so then, it'll be out first quarter, I would think,
Great.
First quarter of next year.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's really good. My friends, definitely check out volume 1 and keep an eye out for volume 2 when that comes out. But yeah, you do get into a lot of this in your introduction and all of that. And so I definitely recommend that people check that out. Okay, so I want to ask a question, and then I want to ask you about a few specific passages to kind of get your take on a post-supersessionist or pre-supersessionist reading of these passages.
Sure.
But first, to kind of set it up, it is widely held that the Epistle to the Hebrews replaces the Levitical priesthood and animal sacrifices with the Messiah's priesthood and sacrifice. And that is the standard supersessionist reading of the text. But you, along with a few other scholars, are challenging that reading. So my question is, what are some reasons within the text of Hebrews itself that may cause us to suspect that the supersessionist reading may not be entirely accurate, that it can't really account for all the textual data here? Is there anything within Hebrews itself that should cause us to pause and reconsider our supersessionist assumptions, if you will?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's all over. Once you kind of see it through this perspective, you kind of see it all the way through. But I mean, first of all, right at the outset of Hebrews, the writer established, he says, look, if the Torah, if violation of the Torah, which was given through Moses, incurs strict punishment, it's even punishment unto death, how much more so should we not neglect the one who is speaking to us from heaven now? Okay, and so people might read that and they say, see, that he's saying that the one who's speaking, Jesus, who's speaking to us from heaven now, overrides the Torah. But no, that's not the argument. That's not the argument that he made. Was if the Torah is valid, so valid that you can't even break the commandments of the Torah, you can't even break the commandments without being punished, how much more so should we be concerned with the word that's being spoken by the one who is higher than Moses? So you're not deprecating Moses, and you're not deprecating the Torah to make this argument. Instead, you're establishing them as a high water mark, and then going above that high water mark.
Yeah, and it would kind of be undermining your conclusion.
Yes.
To say that the Torah is done away with, because the validity of how much greater the Messiah is built on the validity of the commandment. So
right. And then likewise throughout the text, when you're making that whole argument, he makes that long argument about the priesthood of Melchizedek and how that, now, and he says, look, if the Messiah was here on earth, he would not be a priest at all, because according to the law, there are priests who serve here according to the law from the house of Aaron and so forth. So he's not toppling the one in order to establish the other. Instead, he's saying, no, this is established. The house of the Levitical priests and the house of Aaron, they're established for a priesthood here on earth. Therefore, Messiah's priesthood is of a different quality and a different nature. And so each step of the way, it's kind of like this. If this is true, then how much more so that it's the rabbinic maneuver is called Kal Vachomer, from the light to the heavy. But you've got to establish the light thing. That's the logic. In order to invoke the heavy. And so he doesn't, the sacrifices are going on, and he's not pitting the one against the other and saying, one canceling the other. Instead, he's saying these are different. These are completely different purposes.
Right. They're operating in different spheres. And so, that passage you alluded to earlier, Hebrews 8:4, it says, now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law.
Yeah, exactly. And he's not criticizing them for offering gifts according to the law. That's what they're supposed to do. Right. That's their job.
And the whole point there seems to be to affirm the validity of the law.
Absolutely.
He's saying that the reason that Yeshua cannot be a priest on earth is because the law precludes him from being a priest on earth.
Right.
And so that assumes the law's authority in regard to the Levitical descent and the priestly descent.
Yeah.
So okay, so that'll lead in nicely to this next question about a specific passage here. And I'm going to ask you about a few different passages, and these are often cited as evidence of some sort of supersessionism taking place in Hebrews. The first is Hebrews chapter 7, verse 12, which reads, "For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well." And so the idea there is that the Levitical priesthood has been changed. It's now swapped out for the Messiah's priesthood, and now there's a new law as well.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So how would a post-supersessionist approach to this passage explain that?
All right. I'll give you two explanations. The first explanation is more of a general sort of like contextual explanation. And the second one is the one that I got from Matthew Thiessen. Okay. So to begin with, from a general perspective, you're right. You read this, you really put your finger on it here. this 7:12 is kind of like the hinge that the whole interpretation of the epistle is turning on. So there's a change in the priesthood and let's understand what the change was. The change is in the Old Testament, the Aaronic priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, they were the priests, but now under the New Testament, the New Covenant, Jesus is the priest. And so that required a change in the law. So you have the Old Testament is the old law, and now we have a new law, which is the New Covenant. That's how it's understood. That's conventionally how it's understood, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's not how I'm understanding it. That's a problematic reading for all of the reasons that we've already discussed. Rather than a change in the priesthood, we're talking about a change in venue. And this has already been made completely clear and will continue to be made clear over chapter 8 and chapter 9. But this is like at the center of the argument. He's saying his argument is not that that Yeshua has replaced or been, we've swapped out for a new priesthood. Instead, his argument is that Yeshua is of a different priesthood. He belongs to he's a different kind of priest. And so if that's the case, if we're talking about changing to a different priesthood, then there has to be a different law governing that priesthood. Mm-hmm. And so that's exactly what it's going to go on to say, is that it says, for the one of whom these things are spoken, Yeshua, belong to another tribe from which no one has ever served at the altar, for it's evident that our master is descended from Judah and so forth. So he goes on to point out that according to the law of the Levitical priesthood, you have to be a Levite from the house of Aaron.
Right.
So if you're going to have some other kind of priesthood from outside of that, you're going to need some other kind of law, some other kind of criteria for who qualifies for this priesthood. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's, and then it'll tell us what the criteria is. A little bit later, it'll say he draws it from Psalm 110, where he says, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." So the new criteria the law of this kind of Melchizedekian priesthood of the heavenly temple, okay, then here's the change in law. No longer is it required that he's a son of Aaron in order to serve in this in this capacity. And son of Aaron never did serve in that capacity. Mm-hmm. But rather, the criteria is an indestructible life, he says. Immortality, the resurrected form, the resurrected body of Yeshua. That's the criteria for entering into this role of the Melchizedekian priest. Okay, and so that's how I would understand it. Now, what Matthew Thiessen brought, which, if I was better at Greek, I would have maybe figured this out myself. But, he brings this, he points out that when it says for a change is a change in the priesthood, there's necessarily a change in the law. It's not actually the regular Greek word for change. It's the Greek word metathesis, which is it's like this. That's the verbal version, I guess, of metatethemi, which is the word when we talk about the ascension of Enoch. Right. Earlier, it also mentioned in Hebrews. Right. And so it's like, it's this to ascend or to transcend the current order. Right. So Elijah experienced this as well. He had a metatethemi. He ascended in the fiery chariot. So he went from the earthly to the heavenly. Enoch went from the earthly to the heavenly. Okay. And likewise, Yeshua ascended. He went from the earthly in his resurrected form into the heavenly. And so by grabbing this particular word, because this is the same Greek word that's used in the Septuagint to describe Enoch's ascension, by grabbing this particular word, which our writer the writer of Hebrews is familiar with the Septuagint and using the Septuagint all the time. So grabbing this particular word to describe what he's talking about, he's saying, look, if we're talking about an ascended priesthood, because that's what it is, if we're talking about an ascended priesthood, we need an ascended law. Yeah. So we need or another way to put it, if we're talking about a heavenly priesthood that transcends the earthly order, we need a heavenly criteria for that priesthood that transcends the criteria of the earthly order.
Right. Yeah. So the change is not to the earthly Torah or the laws that pertain to the earthly priesthood. Right. There's no change to that. Right. The change is with regard to the location. Yes. So, if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to get your take on an analogy that I came up with while thinking about this. And maybe you can kind of help me tweak it a little bit, but I think this may help some people wrap their minds around it. But one way we can maybe think about this change in the law is to consider the different qualifications between a state governor and the president of the United States. So in order to be a governor of Florida, for instance, a candidate must be a resident of Florida. This means that a resident of Missouri cannot be the governor of Florida due to the qualification, the residency requirement in that case. So the law restricts a resident of Missouri from serving as governor in Florida. However, the law does not restrict a resident from Missouri from serving as president of the United States if he gets elected, because there are different qualifications for serving in that office, serving as president. So the law in that case changed depending upon whether we are talking about serving as governor of Florida or serving as president of the United States. And so in the same way, the law of Moses restricts non-Levites from serving in the Levitical priesthood, but it does not restrict non-Levites from serving in the heavenly priesthood. So moving from the earthly realm into the heavenly realm, ascending, entails different qualifications. It entails a different change in the law, or a change in the law. Would you say that that's a good way of thinking about it? Maybe.
Yeah, that's a fantastic analogy. Yeah, that's great. That's exactly that's exactly what we're talking about, is trying to understand these different. I always use the term venues. These different venues of priestly atonement that are happening, and we're going to find out. He's going to, as he works through this material, he's going to point out it's a different kind of atonement. It's not just a different venue, but it's a different kind of atonement. So there's no conflict here. Right. He says the atonement of the sacrifices through the earthly priesthood that happens in the earthly temple is for the sanctification, various washings for the sanctification of the flesh. Right. Whereas the atonement that Yeshua is working on behalf of Israel and his disciples in the heavenly holy place is an atonement for eternal life, a cleansing of the conscience, he says, right?
Right. Yeah, that is so key, because what are the Levitical priests doing? They're facilitating worship in the earthly sphere or venue, the earthly venue. Yeah. And so the Messiah is facilitating drawing near to God in the heavenly venue. And so that one does not undermine the other or replace the other. They both serve valid functions within their respective venues. Right. As we would understand that.
And in fact, that's part and parcel of rabbinic theology of the temple as well, is that the temple on earth is a reflection of the heavenly temple. It's a reflection of God's eternal dwelling place. And even the idea of the priesthood on earth is as a reflection of the angelic priesthood that worships around the throne of glory. That's just part of Jewish theology. So it's not a great leap for the writer of the book of Hebrews to take this already existing Jewish theology and say, well, that explains why Yeshua ascended. Where is he now? He's at the right hand of the Father, filling this priestly role.
Yeah. He's not a priest on earth. He's a priest in heaven. We already got priests on earth. So nothing's changed with that. Yeah. That's really good. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. And if you don't mind, maybe we can move on to another one. This is another one that comes up a lot. This is right in the middle of this priesthood discussion, talking about the superiority of the Messiah's heavenly priesthood to the Levitical priesthood. And at the end of chapter 8, this is right after the author of Hebrews gives this extensive quotation of Jeremiah, the New Covenant passage in Jeremiah. He says in Hebrews 8, verse 13, he says, quote, "In speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away." And so a lot of people point to this and they say, the author of Hebrews is saying here that the entire old covenant, the Sinai covenant, that is done away with, and Christ came and he started something new. So how should we think about this from a post-supersessionist perspective?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the first thing to point out is that The new covenant is not the New Testament. That's an artificial conflation. So the new covenant appears in Jeremiah, and that's made explicit right in the chapter in Hebrews 8. And so what is the new covenant? The new covenant is a new covenant that God is going to make with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, right, for the Messianic era and for the world to come. So it's because it says, behold, the days are coming. And so days are coming is that's a prophetic clue that we're talking about the day of the Lord, the Messianic era. And so the new covenant is God's arrangement, his new relationship with his people, with Israel, that's going to define the new terms of his relationship with Israel in the Messianic era. And so we're not to the Messianic era yet. As much as we'd like to be, we're not in the kingdom yet. So the new covenant is something for the future. Whereas even like Yeshua said, until heaven and earth disappear, not a single jot or tittle will disappear in any way from the Torah. So it's not wrong. It's not completely wrong to refer to the Torah as the old covenant when you're contrasting it against the covenant in Jeremiah. It's not helpful either. But nevertheless. What we're really contrasting here, as you follow this argument out, and this is just so fascinating. This is like Hebrews 8 and 9 is so fascinating in this regard. But what you're contrasting along with this new and old idea is the first order, which is this present world, Olam Hazeh, with the age to come, Olam Haba, which is the Messianic era and the new heaven and the new earth, and which is eternal life, the resurrected state and so forth. And so that's the real tension, is the day of the Lord, like on one side of the day of the Lord, on the other side of the day of the Lord. And so the writer of the book of Hebrews, he's saying, look, the temple in Jerusalem, the Aaronic priesthood, the Levitical priests, the Levitical sacrifices, all of this stuff pertains to this world, Olam Hazeh, okay? But it doesn't pertain to Olam Haba, the world to come. The priesthood for Olam Haba, for the world to come, is the heavenly priest, the priest from the order of Melchizedek. And the covenant, the Torah, pertains to this world, as long as heaven and earth, right? But the covenant of the Messianic era, the coming kingdom, the world to come, is this new covenant under which it says, this is the covenant I will make. I will put my Torah in their minds. I will write them on their hearts. I will be their God. And he says, and I will be merciful to their iniquities and remember their sins no more. So forgiveness of sins, the spiritual purification, which he brings into resurrection, the perfection of the resurrected state. So all of that, you need all of that context in place to understand what we're saying in verse 13. When he says, in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. All right. He's not deprecating the Torah, which is actually part of the new covenant, if you're listening.
Right.
This is written on your heart. He's not deprecating the Torah. What's actually becoming obsolete and growing old, ready to vanish away, is this present world. Olam Hazeh. It's growing old. It's ready to vanish away on the day of the Lord, when the Messiah comes, the day of the Lord being the Messianic era, and then brings Olam Haba, the world to come, a new heaven and a new earth. And what do we see? I mean, this is leaving the book of Hebrews, but you go into the Apocalypse of John, and we're looking around New Jerusalem, and John says, I looked and I saw no temple.
Right.
There's no temple there. Why is there no temple there? Well, the city is the temple, and and the temple is the throne at the center, and the Lamb on the throne is this. We're in the presence of God. This is not a drill when we're in the world to come. This is not a reflection of the heavenly. This is the heavenly on earth. So
yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I really liked the way you put it. Because there will come a time when the earthly sacrificial system that will vanish away, along with the fallen present creation upon which it is predicated, right?
Right.
Yeah, there will come a time. It's just not going to happen until Yeshua said it would happen, which
That's
is
right.
when heaven and earth passes away
Exactly.
and all things are accomplished. And so it's really this verse in Hebrews, it's talking about a hopeful anticipation. There will be a world to come when these things will vanish away, and it makes complete sense.
Yep.
Because as you said, the entire sacrificial system is predicated upon the inherent mortality of humans, and it's based upon everything having to do with the present creation, our present fallen world that is full of sin and death.
Yeah.
And so one day that's not going to exist. And in John, Revelation 21, in the same chapter where he says, I looked around and there was no temple, right? That's the same chapter. He says sin and death will be abolished, that there will be no more death. There will be no more crying, pain, or mourning anymore.
Right. And so at such a time, even then, it's not as if God cancels his Torah or replaces his Torah. It just becomes irrelevant. It's no longer relevant. This is like the story of the giving of the Torah. When Moses goes up on Mount Sinai in the Midrash in Jewish legend, Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, and the angels say, "Hey, you can't have the Torah. It belongs to us up here in heaven. You can't bring it down there." And he says, "Oh yeah? Well, what's it say in the Torah? Here it says, honor your father and mother. Do you angels have fathers and mothers? No. Oh, it says, okay, look, it says, you shall not covet, you shall not steal. Do you angels covet and steal up here? No. Well, so this doesn't apply to you. This is for us. It's a Jewish legend, but it makes the point that the Torah wasn't relevant to the angels. Likewise, the Torah in these kind of commandments are not relevant to us in the resurrected state when we're in the presence of Hashem. You're right. In the presence of God. There is only God.
And when there's no more sin and death,
yes.
when mortality is swallowed up by immortality, because a lot of what the sacrificial system deals with is the problem of sin and death. It deals with the problem of impurity within the earthly venue.
Yeah.
And so when all of that stuff is no longer present, then the need for the sacrificial system in the world to come, it just doesn't serve a purpose, as you put it.
Exactly.
So that's really good. Yeah, thank you for that. Another passage that a lot of people point to is in chapter 10 of Hebrews. And of course, this is where the author is talking about sacrifices. At the beginning of the chapter, he talks about how the blood of bulls and goats can never take away sin, right? They serve a copy and a shadow of the reality. And then in verse 8, he says, the author, he's quoting the Psalms here. And he says, when he said above, talking about the Son, you have neither desired nor taken pleasure in sacrifices and offerings and burnt offerings and sin offerings. These are offered according to the law. Then he added, behold, I have come to do your will. He does away with the first in order to establish the second. And by that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And so the idea there is again, he does away with the first, covenant, or he does away with the Levitical priesthood in this case, and animal sacrifices in this case, in order to establish the sacrifice of himself. So what would you have to say about that that passage there?
I would have to say that once again, you've put your finger on it. This is a difficult passage. In fact, the first time I taught through Hebrews, I was doing great up until I got to chapter 10, and then that was sort of a car wreck for me. And also the second time I felt more confident about it, but I still wasn't happy about it. It was really a miracle, I think, at least a miracle of timing, that David Moffat's book came into my hands right as I was preparing this stuff for publication and going over these notes again, because he really changed the way that I was reading and understanding Hebrews 10. So I would recommend his books on Hebrews first of all, but just to try to make it simple. And this is material that I've just been writing on and editing up for publication for volume 2 of my commentary on Hebrews. So it's pretty fresh in my mind. But it's even hard to reduce this to explain what's going on here. But in Hebrews chapter 10, you've got a quotation from Psalm 40 that's placed into the mouth of the Messiah, which is a completely normal thing to do in Jewish teaching and in rabbinic midrash of the day, is to take a section from the Psalms or a section from the prophets and apply it to, kind of misapply it, take it out of context and put it into the mouth of another biblical character at a different time or a different occasion in order to make a point. And so that's what has happened here. We've taken some of King David's Psalm 40, which he spoke under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and, prophetically regarding the Messiah. And we've put this psalm into the mouth of the Messiah. And David is saying, sacrifices and offerings you have not desired, which is a very Davidic type of sentiment to make. You think of Psalm 51, where he's, after the sin with Bathsheba, he says, sacrifice and offering you did not desire. If you wanted it, I would have brought it, but a broken heart and a contrite spirit. These are the sacrifices that the Lord wants. And David's not wrong in that. We actually find the Torah specifically says that these sacrifices and offerings for sin are for unintentional sins, but the Torah doesn't tell you what to do when you meant to sin. It doesn't give you a sacrifice. There's no goat for that if you meant to do it. Instead, you have to repent. Repentance, a broken and contrite spirit and heart. So this is a Davidic kind of sentiment, but we've put it into the mouth of the Messiah. It says, when Messiah came into the world, which is just that alone, that is, Messiah came into the world is just a rabbinic idiom to say his purpose. What, the sages would say that I came to do such and such. I came to teach such and such. It's saying it's kind of like we say, I'm about this or I'm about that. The Messiah is about sacrifice and offering you didn't desire. Understood from a Davidic perspective, understood from the point of view of the Psalms. In other words, sacrifices and offerings are insufficient for this purpose. God didn't desire them. They're insufficient for this purpose.
Right.
But a body you have prepared for me. Now, this is where David Moffat came and helped me a lot. I didn't really understand what's going on here. A body you have prepared for me. I was thinking of this as the incarnation, like when he was, he entered into the Virgin Mary as a conception, a divine conception and such through the Holy Spirit. No. That's not what's happening in Hebrews 10. When he says, a body you have prepared for me, which is in the Septuagint version of Psalm 40, by the way. It's not in the Hebrew. It's not in the Masoretic text. It's just a Septuagint version. But he says, a body you have prepared for me. The writer of the book of Hebrews is talking about his resurrected body. Like, a body you have prepared for me is his resurrected body, by virtue of which he is able to ascend into the heavenly temple and carry out this atoning work in the heavenly holy of holies. So then he says, burnt offerings and sin offerings you've taken no pleasure in regard to this purpose of atonement for the world to come. Behold, I have come to do your will. It's written of me in the scroll of the book being the Torah. So what are we talking about here? Well, we've just been talking about it earlier in the chapter about Yom Kippur, the atonement that would happen annually in Yom Kippur. So he's reaching back to Leviticus 16. It's written about me. This is my job in the heavenly Holy of Holies, in the heavenly sanctuary. So he says, when he said, you have neither desired nor taken pleasure in sacrifices and offerings, burnt offerings and sin offerings. These are offered according to the law. He makes the caveat and say these sacrifices, which are according to the Torah. Then he added, behold, I've come to do your will. He does away with the first, or sets aside the first, in order to establish the second. Now that was your question, and that's the difficult verse. Okay. Because it sounds like he does away with the first, means he cancels the temple and the Levitical system in order to establish his new gig that he's got going. But we've already made the whole argument that they're in two different venues and they're not in competition with one another. All right, so we look at this more closely. The Greek word here that gets translated as does away with, or sometimes gets translated as cancels, is anereo, which actually has two possible meanings as far as I can tell in New Testament Greek. Now, I'm no Greek scholar, but this is what the lexicons tell me. All right. So the lexicons tell me that it can mean to take up, like to take something up, or to kill. Okay, so to kill, you might force that onto the text. He kills the first, but it seems like a strange choice of words to say that the Messiah, kills the first to establish the second. Instead, I'm much happier reading it as he takes up the first, the role of that priesthood, the role of that's been described in Leviticus 16, where in the scroll of the book it's written of me. He takes that up, and so he takes up that role. He takes up that Levitical function, so to speak, in the heavenly in the heavenly temple. So he takes up the role of the high priest and carries it out in the role that what the high priest carries out in the earthly temple. He carries out something similar in the heavenly temple in order to establish the second thing, which is to do your will, O God. So it's not that the Messiah does away with the Levitical functions. Rather, he's taking up the corresponding priesthood and function for the heavenly in regard to eternal life in the world to come.
Right. And then in verse 10, it says, and by that we will have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all.
Exactly. And the offering of the body is not his death on the cross. It's the presentation of the death on the cross is just a means to an end. Right. The end being the resurrection and the ascension by which he can enter the heavenly holy of holies. So the offering of his body is the presentation of his body before God in the holy of holies, as it were, of heaven, at the right hand of the throne, where he can atone and intercede for his disciples and all Israel. Right. Yeah. And I know as you mentioned earlier, you're familiar with David Moffat, but his insights on that, on the role of the ascension in the atonement has just been totally eye-opening. Yes. So revolutionary, just fantastic. Yeah. Well, that is all the questions that I have for you. But thank you so much. I feel like you've really shed a lot of light on some of these difficult passages and given us a clearer understanding, a more historically plausible interpretation of the Epistle to the Hebrews, which is, I believe, that post-supersessionist perspective. And I really appreciate you coming on. I highly recommend your work. Once again, guys, go and get the commentary. Volume 1 is out right now. Yeah, you can come over to our website at First Fruits of Zion. It's FFOZ. That's F as in first, F as in fruits, OZ as in of Zion. First Fruits of Zion, FFOZ.org. Click on the store and go over to the store. We make this as hard as possible. Click on the store, and then you should be able to find my work there on the book of Hebrews. I also have a commentary on Galatians. I also have a commentary on Ephesians that you might enjoy.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. And my friends, go check it out, ffoz.org. Get the volume 1 of the Hebrews commentary, and be on the lookout for volume 2, which will hopefully be coming out, as you said, early next year. So I personally will be anxiously waiting for that. Your work on this book has blessed me, and yeah, thank you, my friend, for coming on again, and thank you all for joining this discussion. I hope you were blessed, and we'll see you next time. Blessings.
All right. Thank you.